make your developers on-call on production. And before I'm going to talk about this, I'm going to give you a bit of an explanation of what we did at Facebook before production engineering. And as a use case, I'm going to show you in Navo, which is a team inside Facebook, how we migrated Navo into production engineering and what we learned from the process. And hopefully, I will leave some time for Q&A. So let's talk a little bit about Facebook before production engineering. Basically, we had one team which calls SRO, Site Reliability Operations. Site Reliability Operations. And the purpose of the team was actually to monitor the site 24/7, fixing stuff, firefighting all the time, making sure that Facebook is up and running and installed. And we did this by 24/7, I mean that even during nighttime, somebody was working actively on Facebook. So on US daytime, somebody from America was working on Facebook, and on Europe daytime, when America went to sleep, somebody else was working on production and fixing stuff. And when we thought about the future of Facebook and we saw that the company is growing and users are joining the service all the time, I thought it's just not going to scale much longer. And the reason for that is scale, but scale is kind of a magic word that everybody understands. Oh, something is going on, but it's not just that only Facebook. It's not that, okay, we had feed and we had photos and videos and groups and ads, but later on we also had Messenger as an independent service. We had Internet.org, which connects the world from the infrastructure level. We have WhatsApp, we have Instagram, and you probably want to see Oculus as well. And when the company grew to multiple products and multiple kind of users and use cases, we started realizing that one of the biggest problems we had is context. So remember that SRO was an independent team. They were not part of the software development process or something like that. They were just making sure everything works. But they don't really know exactly what the product means. They don't exactly know the fine-tuning and the delicate parts of the product itself. This led sometimes to people not really know exactly what we are pushing to production, right? I mean, sure, we have a new release. Sure, it has some awesome features, but how does that affect the system? What are those features? How many users are going to be added now to Facebook because of that? The other problem was that because we were out of context, we sometimes focused on the irrelevant stuff. So I'm sure all of you had this problem that you have this component in production that you just hate it. You just look at the monitoring and you just fucking hate this product and you want to fix it. But sometimes, even if it's really annoys you, it's not the main focus of your team. Maybe this system is not really have any consequences of production or on your users. And eventually, that leads to conflicts with the developers. So you have this dev versus ops situation. The other problem is that because we are fighting all the time, and as engineers, we always try to perform better, try to grow, try to learn new technologies, new development languages, any other kind of stuff like that. And when you have this desire to perform in one hand, this notion, this belief, this thing that keep you going, and on the other hand, you are firefighting all the time and trying to make shit works, you get frustrated. And you say, I just want to learn a new thing. And then sometimes we get a little bit unfriendly, I would say delicately. And eventually it leads to people burning out, right? You're just coming to work, you wanna keep on going, you wanna keep on learning, but you have this all mess that you're trying to fix and it's really hard. So as a company, we thought about what we can do, how we can fix this problem. And we looked at the industry, we saw what the industry has to offer. And one thing we saw is NOC, Network Operations Center. But the problem with the NOC for us is that it's a network operation center. It's a centralized solution. It's something like taking SRO and institutionalizing it inside a company. which only deepens the gap between development and operations. So it wasn't a good fit for us. So we thought, well, fuck it, let's invent something that we want to do. So we invented production engineering. And yeah, this, by the way, this was made by Shahar, which I don't know where he is. Yeah, there you go. So we thought about let's reinvent something new. And a lot of time during interviews or over here when I mingle with people, people ask me, what is this production engineering? What is the difference between a production engineer and a DevOps engineer or a system engineer or whatever engineer? And the thing is that there is no really difference between a software engineer and a production engineer. So think about it like this. You have a software engineer, right? Everybody here knows what a software engineer is. And a software engineer could be an Android engineer. It could be an iOS engineer. It could be a Linux kernel engineer. It could be Windows engineer. So a production engineer is just like any other software engineer, but its main expertise and focus is making sure that production is available, that is running, that the code that we write actually works on production. And he is part of the team. So software engineering team in Facebook are compiled from Android engineers, iOS engineers, and production engineers, and web engineers, and whatever engineers you might have. And because of that, we are taking part in meetings, we are involved in roadmap, we have this insight on the product that we didn't have before as SRO. And of course, because we are sharing, we are in the same team with the software engineers, we also share on-call rotations together because it only makes sense that if you're working on something with your teammates, you're going to own it together, right? And as the company grows and you have more teams, you have more products, this model can scale out because if you can scale more team in your company, you can put just maybe one, maybe two, maybe 10, depending on your team, another production engineer, and this model can scale out. So let's talk a little bit about Onavo. So Onavo is now a team inside Facebook. We make Android and iOS apps to offer VPN connectivity and data compression and data control on your mobile data plan. Onavo was founded in 2010, and since then until 2003, when we were acquired by Facebook, we ran the same model as you might have encountered in your day-to-day life. Developers are writing the code, making sure that we have new features, that we can grow from the user perspective, and operation, make sure that everything is up and running, deployment, and you know the drill. And when we got into Facebook and we started looking around, we saw that this production engineering thing actually works. It actually works. We can see that we have teams with software engineers and production engineers that are working together and owning together production, developing together the application, the infrastructure, whatever they do, and they're successful at it, which really blew our mind. So we thought about what we can do after we realized this is a good solution for us as well. So what I want to do now is make kind of a couple of steps guide for you guys to think about what you can do in your organization maybe later on. So the first step is relatively simple. Go ahead and sit with your developers. There is a cross line. I'm not sure it's being seen over here, but make sure you go ahead and sit with the developers, not close to them, not next to them, with them, in the same room, if possible. If you're in an open space, just barge into the open space. Just be there. And the thing about humans is that we have this nice feature when we can talk to each other. It's amazing, I can assure you. And once you start talking and start to building this relationship with your developers, you achieve a couple of things. One is you notice what is going on with their lives. You notice what's difficult for them in their day-to-day job. Maybe it's the development tools. Maybe it's the deployment process. Maybe it's some kind of another tooling that they have. Maybe, I don't know, something else. And the other thing is that you are getting noticeable. So I had experience in previous companies that I worked for a couple of years, and I had really good friends, but after like maybe 1 year and a half, one good friend of mine came to me and said, listen, what do you actually do? I mean, you're here at the company for so long. I have no idea what you do. So when you sit next to them, you also get noticeable. They understand what your function in the organization, and because of that, they're going to appreciate you more. Step number 2 is, I think, the most difficult one. To start and begin this conversation with your colleagues and make sure they understand what is production engineering and why it's good for them. Yeah, this is very weird. Yeah, so you want to start having conversation, right? You want to make sure that everybody are on board with you and you want to go forward with this process. And when you think about it, eventually you will go ahead and say to someone, congratulations, let's do on-call together. And the reaction might be a little, I don't know, something like this, maybe a little what face. It's not really easy to get this message going, right? Some of them might even panic. Some of them might even say, listen, I don't have the skill set. I don't know what SSH is. I don't know what Linux is. I just write code. That's all I do. Some people can say, I don't have time for this. I need to build features. I need to make the next release. My product manager is just sitting on my neck, and I just cannot do it. It's something else. It's your problem, by the way. And some people might even say, you know what, fuck this. I don't want to do this, and I'm going home. And you don't want to get into this situation, of course. You want to make sure that they really understand what they're getting into, and they want to do this. So I'll try to convey my message using some piece of code, but it's not proper code, so don't get too caught up with this. If you find syntax error, find me a bug, I'll fix it. So the first thing is to talk with your managers. Start beginning with, maybe it's going to be your CTO, maybe it's going to be your tech lead, maybe it's one of your managers in the organization, somebody that has influence and somebody that you can actually go up and speak to. And the reason for that is that eventually you would want to go ahead and talk to the engineers, right? They are going to be the ones to do on-call. And they might go ahead and escalate to the manager because they don't like the idea or because they don't fully get why they need to do this. And if you have the backup of your managers, it will be much more easier to convey the message together as a team and not as an individual that just went crazy and wanted to put everybody on call. After you do that, go ahead and make sure you align all the engineers like in a line and think about who is the most approachable. Who is more likely to understand why this is important? And the reason for that is, again, as you gain more people that actually agree with you and understand this is the right solution, it will be much more easier. And after you do all of this and you kind of mapped out everything, just go ahead and talk for each person. Just go ahead and talk with them. Try to convey your message. And while you do that, make sure that you're not forcing yourself. Because when you start approaching people and you want to change the way they work and not what they work on, it's really difficult sometimes for people to just understand the idea that you're not trying to make their life shittier. You just want to make their life better and the company better. So make sure you're open for feedback, because in this stage, some people might say, listen, I don't know A, B, and C. So you need to take note, okay, we need to teach them A, B, and C. We need to fix all of these problems one by one until everyone is ready. And again, the more people you get on board, the easier it is going to be for you next. So now you talk with everybody, and everybody wants to do it, right? Because it's a good idea. And now the thing is that everybody are willing, or maybe most of the people are willing. And you want to make sure that they have as less friction as possible before they're going to go ahead and own production. So a lot of times we write tools for ourselves, and we don't really think about the other folks that are going to be running it as well. So the first step I would say is just have some small documentation, not something grandiose that's going to be taking like 15 years to complete, but just pointers to the technologies that you use, to the open source project, to the parts of the code that are interesting, some scripting and tooling that you have. Make sure you have it laid out. If somebody wants and go ahead and start learning by himself, for him to have a starting point. The other thing is that our tooling are not always suitable for everybody, right? I mean, if you go ahead and give someone an Nagios dashboard or an Nagios config, they don't really know exactly what to do with it. Maybe you have some scripts that you wrote for yourself because we like to automate stuff all the time, but they're not really readable or suitable for someone else to use. So like arguments and help for parsing the command line or whatever. For example, I can say that in Facebook we have this system to create alerts, right? So if you want to create an alert, you just go ahead and clone a repository. You have a small Python file, and you need to run a bunch of functions that are well documented somewhere as an API. And after you wrote this code and you ship this code to the repository, you have an alert. Easy. Like you don't have to know a new DSL or a new configuration syntax or whatever. It's very friendly and approachable to somebody else. And the third thing about tooling is graphs and dashboards. So I can say for myself that I really, really love dashboards. Sometimes I even love them too much. And because of that, they look like a pile of colors and shit. And because of that, when somebody else want to go ahead and take a look at my dashboards, especially when they're on call and they're trying to debug a production issue, it's really difficult for them to understand what's going on. So make sure that you have a set of dashboards that are high level, that they give good intuition of the health of the service. And thing to notice here is that go ahead and make sure that you have production KPIs, right? Make sure that that you have proper titling, that the keys, that the name of the metrics makes sense to somebody that is not building, who hasn't built the actual dashboard. They actually know what's going on over there. And of course, make them intuitive and reachable, maybe even for the product managers, maybe even for the managers themselves. After we went all on our tooling, alerts is kind of like our tooling as well, but think about it again. Some software engineer go ahead, he's on call now, he's waking up in the middle of the night, and he gets an alert. If it's a false alarm, he will hate you for the rest of his life, because I mean, why did you wake me up if it's a false alarm? So make sure you go ahead and review all of your alerts from scratch. It's gonna take a long time, but make sure you do it. The thing to note here is that make sure that you're actually indicating a real problem. I mean, I can talk on this slide for 1 hour and a half easy, but make sure it's actually a real problem. And not only that it's a real problem, it's interesting, it's impactful, and you actually can do something about it. Because if not, the developers and everybody who's going to be on call justifiably going to say, well, this is shit, I'm not going to do this. So again, remove the friction and make everything as smooth as possible. Once you get into this state, you have your team or your company, whatever granularity you go ahead and perform this process, willing, and you have the tooling ready for them, and everything is just set up for you to get started. And in order to train the team, you need to make sure that you take something into consideration. Learning something or teaching somebody is super easy. But remembering it one day afterwards, maybe a week later, maybe a month later, it's extremely impossible to do. I mean, I learned a lot of stuff during my career. I remember none of it. Like, I'm using man pages all the time, right? I don't really know what's going on. I don't remember flags, I don't remember systems. I need to keep remembering it all the time. And because of that, when you structure your training sessions, make sure that you have, again, some kind of a wiki, a small one, not something big, but again, something that they can go ahead and go back to and say, yeah, I remember he was speaking about this chef thing. I don't remember what it does. I'm going to go ahead and look it up and just learn by myself. The other thing is that the best way to remember something is to actually do it, right? You can learn, you can read a bunch of stuff, but until you go ahead and do something, that's when the learning process is taking place. So hands-on, hands-on, hands-on. We created a pool of tasks that we can just spread out to engineers that they just can go on and do it without our help even. And It doesn't have to be high impact. It doesn't have to be the next big feature in the infrastructure. It just has to be like a small dip in the work. Just go ahead and do a chef diff. Go ahead and provision a server. Go ahead and set up a new whatever you guys have in your infrastructure. And of course, when you do it, make sure you do it reusable, because the next engineer that we're going to go into the team, you're going to be probably the one who's going to do this session again. So make sure you reuse everything when you do it. And after everybody is willing and everybody has their skill set, you will want to go ahead and start to do the on-call rotation on production, which is the fun part, actually. And a couple of things here is that if you think about it, and I'm probably sure that if you try to recall your past experience when you join a company, it's really scary even sometimes to go ahead and do this first on-call rotation. It's very difficult because you lack the confidence. You're not really sure if you're going to own it. You're not sure if something breaks, you will actually be able to fix it or understand even what's the problem. And try to keep that in mind when you do this first couple of iterations. So in order to overcome this, we started by doing just very short amount of on-calls. Like the cycles themselves were very, very short. We did 1 day for each engineer, right? So let's say we have, 5 engineers. We just did 5 days where one of them each did one on-call. And as they gain more confidence, we expanded a little bit from 1 day to 2 days, from 2 days to 3 days, from 4 days, eventually to 1 week. And the thing to notice here is that when you think about it, I'm a live example of somebody who heard a software engineer says, I'm willing to own production for 1 week, all by myself. And that by himself, it's just fucking amazing. The other thing we did in order to make sure that they gained this confidence over time is to do on-call summaries. So after we did on-call, after each engineer did the on-call, he made some list of the alerts that were raised and what he did in order to tackle them, and what we can do in the future. Because maybe we can automate some of the stuff, maybe we can even remove some of the alerts. And when you do this on-call, when you start to do this rotation with the other engineers, they might go ahead and dismiss some of the alerts, right? We all done it. I mean, I did it. You see an alert, you say, yeah, it's going to fix itself in like a couple of minutes, and then it doesn't. So when something happens, make sure you are preemptively go ahead and making sure that they're actually doing something. You don't have to be all creepy about it and just sitting behind their desk. Just make sure you talk to them and say, yeah, I saw this alert came up. Are you all right? Do you need any help or something like that? Just make sure you are approachable and they know you are there for them. So let's try to sum up all of the steps. So step number 1 is go ahead and sit with them. Make sure you build this relationship with them. Make sure you are noticeable. Make sure they understand what's your agendas and what you do in your day-to-day life. Then go ahead and speak with them. Make sure you get the feedback that you need from them, because they're going to have feedback, guaranteed. They will have something to say about this. After you do that, make sure that your tooling is ready, because it's probably not. I mean, when I write something new, it's going to be crappy for somebody else to go ahead and look and try to use it. And again, also for your alerts, make sure that your alerts are indicative, they're impactful, and they're actually signaled on a real problem and not something you just made up. Do the training, and when you do the training, try to remember. It's kind of funny because you need to try to remember that learning is easy, but remembering is hard. So make sure that it's going to take a while, and make sure you can do it with some tasks or some documentation that they can later follow up on. And finally, go ahead and start do the on-call and make the on-call with them in the first time to make sure that they feel comfortable and they have this confidence to actually own production. And after all of these steps that we did, we were doing on-call, and the software engineers were doing on-call, and I felt really good about that. But what I feel even better that the software engineers in my team actually making initiatives by themselves. So a bunch of alerts that we have were not that impactful in terms of our production, so we just removed those because it takes a lot of time to fix it, and we know we're not going to have time for this. So we just delete everything. And these were changes ran by the software engineers. Some of the software engineers really like Chef, apparently, and they just made a bunch of diffs, and they changed a bunch of stuff on how Chef behaves in the infrastructure. And another win that we had is that we tried to make the software engineers work on some perf issue that we have in our VPN infrastructure. And it was really difficult to do that before this process because we tried and it didn't work. And after this process, one of the engineers took it by himself and go ahead and make this change, and we gained a really significant improvement in CPU. So there are benefits to this process eventually. So I'd like to give you some tips from my point of view on this process, and not only just a list of things to do. So one thing is, make sure you are openly communicate everything, right? When I started this process, I felt that after I start engaging the software engineers, nobody is going to like me in this company forever because I'm going to say to them, let's do Uncle together. And after I thought about it, before I approached them, I thought, but I really believe in this process. I really believe that this is the right thing to do because of everything I said, because I really strongly believe in it. And because I came with confidence, and I was able to listen to what they say, and I wasn't defensive about it, I was able to actually make progress, which was pretty impressive in my opinion. The other thing to do is make sure you have deadlines. It's really easy to get carried away in this process. So for example, reviewing your alerts, right? If somebody has done it in this process in his company, you know it's going to take some time because you need to remove some and redefine some thresholds, and it could take a lot of time. So make sure that you have deadlines, so you bucket your time, because it's really easy to carry it away in technical stuff instead of just go ahead and approach your colleagues. And when you do start this on-call, and you do start hand-holding everybody together in this on-call, it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of context switch because people will need your help all the time at the beginning because they don't really know. They lack this confidence. So make sure you're available, and it's going to take a lot of time from your end. So when you plan your quarter, when you plan your half, go ahead and think about it. And of course, make sure you're open for feedback in this process all the time, because otherwise you just won't be able to finish it. And I think that the main message I want to put in your heads, if I could, that this process is possible. So maybe some of you think, yeah, you guys are Facebook, you just know everything and everything is easy for you. But no, this was a team that was a startup company that was bought by Facebook, and this company, this team, did it all by yourself. It wasn't some magic tooling that we have, it's not some magic automation, it was just plain old folks go ahead and make cultural change in their team. So it's possible. And once you understand it, you would realize that there is no spoon. Any questions? Yeah.
Actually, two questions. One, how long did it take you in this process from beginning to end? And how many people did you lose?
So first of all, we lost 0 people.
Can you repeat?
Yeah. So the question was how long the entire process took and how many people we lost among the way. So we lost 0 people, thankfully. Some of them did panic, though. But I think the whole process, we began the conversation, and we began to do the conversation really slowly. So the entire conversation part was taking a couple of months. I don't remember exactly. I can go back to you on that. But it's really a matter of sensitivity to understand where people are standing on, right? So we did the conversation, I think, maybe 4 months. I'm just throwing out. And then starting actual conversation on when are we going to do it. And this took maybe a couple of weeks. From that point on, it took us maybe 2 months, 2 months or something like that to just make the training and everything. And the on-call we started to do maybe from 1 day, then like 1 day for a couple of weeks, and then 2 days for 1 week, and after that it got much faster. Thanks. No? All right. Yeah, so they're kicking me off, as you might see. If you want to grab me, I'm over the Facebook booth or just eating free food from everywhere. Thank you.